Hello, everybody. Now, as the first phase of the West Bengal election draws near, we're going to talk about a fascinating aspect of Bengal politics, the issue of identity in its myriad forms and its impact on elections and society as a whole. And we have just the right person to do it with. The eminent sociologist and writer, Dr. Surajit Mukhopadhyay. Welcome, Dr. Mukhopadhyay.
Thank you for inviting me to this talk. Pleasure having in this conversation.
Now, Dr. Mukhopadhyay, earlier we've seen that in West Bengal, the issue of identity was not so overt as it is over the last 15 years, let's say. There were separatist movements related to identity, like the Gorkhaland movement, the Kamtapuri movement. But this seems to have become far more apparent in the last several years, including the broader Bengali identity and the religious identity. Now, let's talk about how this came into being in Bengal politics.
You see, this follows the broad trend in politics all over the world. See, the left positioned identity as a matter of between people who have resources, access to resources, and people who do not have access to resources. That was one kind of identity. And this is an identity that based itself on economic considerations. Post the decline of the left, other forms of identity have become more important, especially identities related to ethnicity, to subnationalisms, to religious identities, etc., etc. In other words, the first identity trope that we had in terms of people who have and people who do not have is not supposedly holding water. What is becoming more important are identities which are supposedly primordial. And what you see entering Bengal politics now is the politics of primordiality, right? And how these supposedly primordial identities are homogenized. So when we say Bengali identity, I mean, that's a homogeneous identity. It really doesn't say much sociologically. It doesn't have much meaning anthropologically, right? In Bengal, there are many people who do not speak Bangla as their mother tongue. So when you say Bengali, is it that they are speaking Bengali as their mother tongue? If so, are we excluding them? That's a big question. And it has always been a big question. Then again, the North-South divide. The South Bengal is more kind of one kind, especially Rarbongo, as we say. And Calcutta, of course, has its own kind of historicity, evolution, a very separate kind of Bengaliness which flourished in a metropolitan city and which cannot be replicated or duplicated in other parts. Then you come to North Bengal. North Bengal has myriad tribes, ethnic groups, even small groups like Totos who are on the decline, to the Rajbangshis, to the Koch, to even the Rabhas, a small tribe many people don't know, I mean, who are more dominant in Assam than in Bengal. So all these tribes and all these sub-national groups, if you can call them, these ethnic groups, more importantly, they form the core of North Bengal politics. And what the left did was it plastered over these differences by saying, look, despite your differences, you are united. You are united by the fact that you have access to resources and you don't have access to resources. You are one of those who are part of the have-nots vis-a-vis those who have. And that's your real divide, that's your real identity. And I think that it is remarkable that the left could juggle with so many cultural pluralism with this kind of an economic understanding of identity. And I think that's unraveling. So what is new for Bengal is the unraveling of these identities which are dormant and which in a way accepted the fact that the fight is between those who have and those who have not.
You talked about economic development being the main focus of the left to tide over the various ethnic differences.
Yes.
The state government right now has also claims to be pursuing the same policy, but they're also highlighting the various ethnicities of the various ethnic identities by forming these development boards. The word development is there. So what is the efficacy of the formation of such boards, and can it help?
You see, as I said, these were dormant, these identity politics, that I'm Kurmi, or I'm Santal, or I'm Birhor, or I'm Coach. These were dormant in Bengal politics. And you had left leaders who came from these communities. But they didn't say that I am only for a Birhor or a Santal or a Coach or a Rajbakshi. You see, that's the kind of thing. So if you look at the way the left would nominate its members to fight the elections, they were always coming from these diverse backgrounds. So it's not that the left was unaware of these divisions. As I said, the left wanted to plaster over these divisions through this. But after the decline of the left, it is very important to see how identity politics has developed all over the world. And India and Bengal is no exception to that. So people said that we are being discriminated because we are such and such. And this idea that your identity is itself a cause of discrimination. And if you don't address that cause, in other words, you don't address the ethnic concern, you do not have an equilibrium. You see, politicians are always looking for equilibrium, right? And there are two ways of doing this equilibrium. One, by consensus, which is the most democratic form of holding a equilibrium, or by ramming down their throat a certain kind of a straitjacket and you say we are all this and nothing more, nothing less, and that model doesn't work, and it has never worked in history. People have tried it, but it has not worked. So how do you have a democratic consensus which is an equilibrium? And equilibrium is always in flux. So the phase that you see now of ethnicities coming up and claiming their ethnic identity and saying, well, because I am this, you see, therefore I am being discriminated. And what the government is doing, which a government after all is a political entity, what is it doing? It's just articulating these concerns. If it had not articulated these concerns, look at it from the other side, then what would have happened? Well, you would have bottlenecked those concerns, and then you would have created rupture, and the equilibrium would have been lost. So government, this is kind of what we in political science call the systemic theory, developed by David Easton and others long time back. They said, well, inputs come into the system disposes of those inputs. How does it dispose of it? Does it do it well? Does it not do it well? And if it does it well, then, well, that's a solution. If it doesn't do, well, it comes back. But when it comes back, what kind of price do you pay for it coming back? So I think that, when you start tinkering with ethnicities, with these kind of regional aspirations, and you say, well, this is the way, I'm going to address the issue, you are riding the tiger, right? Because that is something which is very dangerous. And yet at the same time, that's how the politics has developed. I mean, to give you a broader example, look at Yugoslavia, for example, or the Balkans. I mean, in the 90s, just fractured, right? So suddenly you have Kosovo and Bosnia and Herzegovina all coming out and saying, we are not Yugoslavia anymore, right? So I think that kind of thing has caught the imagination of people, and that's coming out, right? Now, whether that will be good enough for development, is your question, is yet to be tested. I mean, do you have an all-round development by privileging ethnicity over other concerns? That's the kind of question that's being asked. And I think that politics is also an experiment, right? And one of the experiments that is being done at the moment is privileging this ethnic identity and saying, well, that will lead to development. Now, the question is, are you going to weaponize this ethnic division? Are you going to use them to score some political points, which will ultimately defeat your very purpose of the equilibrium? And that, I think, is the crux of the political matter that Bengal is facing in this election. The weaponization of ethnicities, especially through the BJP and its allies, And on the other hand, the very defensive kind of posturing that we have had development so that, you counter this kind of weaponization of ethnicity by going back to the old idea of development. And I think that's the polarity at the moment.
But in West Bengal, there are many cases where the identity has little to do with economic concerns, where the identity, particularly if you look at the Jangalmahal area, where the Kurmi and the Adivasis, they account for around about 40, nearly about 40 assembly constituencies. There we see the Kurmi community wanting, demanding their ST status, not for any economic concerns, because they believe that this is something to do with their identity.
Yes.
And the Adivasis demanding recognition of their Sarana Dharam as their religion, as a separate religion, different from what the BJP calls the broader Hindutva. So how do you account for this? And this is one of the poorest regions in the country, in this state.
That's right. You see, tribes have always been marginalized, right? And one of the reasons of marginalization was how the British colonial system earmarked tribes into separate categories. That is, they were seen as people different from the mainstream Indians. For example, the Kurmis, they were seen as a primitive tribe. Then they became a scheduled tribe. And later on, they have now become an OBC or other backward caste. So they have been moved from the ST status, which was given to them post-independence, to this. Now, this is what they're fighting for. So they say, let's just become tribes again. All right. And because post-independence, we have a lot of legal, constitutional safeguards for tribes, which I think they feel would give them back some kind of a historical, cultural space, which they have lost. This is vital because tribes do feel marginalized. The remoteness of the geography is very spatial as well, right? And the fact that their language is not recognized, which is one of the demands of the Kurmis, let the language be recognized, let the religion be recognized, right? Which means you recognize me as a cultural entity and not kind of something of a derivative entity. So I think the tribes have a fair point in the sense that, their identity is being eroded and they understand this very well. And they've seen tribes, who have lost their identity completely. The Shawars, for example, back to the walls, the Totos, back to the walls, Birhors. So it's not that they're fantasizing. They know that if they don't fight for this, then of course their heritage would be lost. And everyone, all of us, we'd like to hold on to our heritage in some form or the other. So I think it's a reclamation. And interestingly, reclamations take place only through modernity. In other words, modernity creates a non-space. When you say blindly you are a citizen, it doesn't say much who you are except that you are a citizen. But when you want to reclaim your past, you have to go beyond citizenship. You have to go beyond the nomenclature that the government gives to you. And you're therefore reclaiming something. And this is because you feel that a certain kind of socio-political structure is eating away, destroying, maybe incrementally, but nevertheless doing this, so that you would be lost in some time to come. Now, many of these tribes are also coming from oral cultures. They are pre-literate, as we say, right? So their transmission of knowledge, history, their transmission of codes of conduct within their own social life were always being transmitted from the elders to the younger people. They were not writing because they did not know how to read and write. So all these kind of things have actually contributed to the feeling of marginalization. And if you look at many of the tribes, especially in the Northeast now, where they're quite dominant, they are very I would say, very, very sensitive to the fact that they would need to now move from orality to a more literate space, write down their oral history, write down their oral cultures. So I think that the tribes have this this burden on their shoulder of being marginalized by modernity, and therefore fighting back. Now, whether, again, the question would be whether by saying, well, yes, I see you as a Shabor, or I see you as a Birhor, or I see you as a Santal, would give them the development that they seek. After all, at the end of the day, you have to eat your bread. Well, we don't know. I mean, look at Chhattisgarh and Jharkhand as examples of tribal people claiming not only a small piece of a region, but an entire state. In 2000, these were carved out of Bihar and Madhya Pradesh. And if you look at the socio-economic dominance in these two states, they don't come from the tribals. Which is a very kind of open secret. Right? They don't come from the tribals. It's kind of big industries and capitalists who dominate the kind of iron ore, coal, etc., industry in both Jharkhand and in Chhattisgarh, right? But what has happened, of course, is that you have sent a tribal as a chief minister, especially in Jharkhand, not so much in Chhattisgarh, but of course in Jharkhand. And that gives you some kind of a symbolic leverage, right? So I think that, as with all experiments, it's an ongoing process. I don't think that just by creating a tribal space, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, or Paharis, Uttarakhand, immediately solves the problem. Because this problem is much more deeply rooted in socio-economic conditions, especially their kind of geography, right? So it's an open question what will happen. But the non-left parties would like to harp on this because that gives them the differentia specifica from the left. They say, well, you were not being given this due and we are doing so. So I think that is why we have a divide in terms of a political, cultural orientation between the left and the non-left.
But you're talking about the assertion of identity of the tribals for years of marginalization and deprivation. Now, we're seeing that to be fairly widespread and not just restricted to tribals or economically backward. We're seeing that among Muslims, among various communities, where any community that feels persecuted or feels threatened or in any way. So it's not just the tribals, is it?
Yes, of course not. I mean, you see, first of all, the mainstream does not need to assert itself politically, because the mainstream itself is assertive of the concerns of the dominant, right? So the upper caste, the upper class, the upper middle class, the upwardly mobile, people who are professionals, don't need to have separate kind of identity politics, not because they are oblivious of their identity, but because what that socio-economic condition serves their purpose, right? If it doesn't, and when it will not, of course they will revolt. For example, that we know when Islam has always been a minority in India, but when there were Nawabs, did they feel persecuted? I don't think so. It's only later on that this sense of persecution comes, or the fact that they would be persecuted, which made many upwardly mobile upper class Muslims leave India for Pakistan on this idea that we will be persecuted. They were not at that time, maybe. Now, so persecution, the larger trope that has emerged in India is between the Hindus and the Muslims, and that's the sad part of the political story in Bengal as also. Because when you homogenize Hindus and Muslims, you paper over again a lot of differences, right? There are caste differences within the Hindu community. There are caste differences even among the Muslim communities, right? But you paper over these differences, you homogenize, and importantly, the mainstream has found in the minority a target to consolidate their political vote, right? And this is a classic political strategy of the right. You create, an enemy within the enemy within, the internal enemy, is much more important than the enemy without. So you can go and shake hands with the sultans and the sheikhs of the Muslim countries in UAE or in other parts of the world, have very cordial relations with them, and then you come back to India and you start vituperative, campaigns against the Muslims. So again, Muslim doesn't give us that kind of understanding of what is actually happening. On the other hand, the Muslims are also, some of them, especially those who are literate or highly educated, they obviously feel the pain. I mean, these little communal nudges and the little communal comments all the time that you make, right, about the minority hurts them. They understand. The fact is that they cannot articulate it very well. But sometimes they do symbolically articulate. I have a student who told me, a very senior student, one who was doing research under my supervision. She said, I was never wearing a hijab when I was in my master's degree. I started wearing it to assert the fact that I am a Muslim. What's wrong with it? Right? I'm a Muslim. I'm an Indian citizen. I can be both. So you see, this idea of having multiple identities within one identity, what we call pluralism, is anathema to a certain kind of a particular kind of a political formation. And Bengal did not experience this. So far, it could distance itself from weaponizing religion as identity. But now you have leaders who go openly out saying this. And I don't know how the electorate will react, because Muslims in Bengal speak Bangla like you and me, right? Or the regional variants. I mean, there's no distinction. I mean, it's a kind of mother tongue, all Bengalis. And the fact that if you take all the Bengali speaking people, all Bengali speaking, irrespective of where they are, whether in India or Bangladesh or other parts, then Islam is the largest religion of the Bengalis, right? But we have, with partition, managed to create this understanding that Hindu Bengalis are the largest representative of Bengali language, religion, culture. The partition has helped it, which then marginalizes the Muslims completely, because they say, well, suddenly they find that, well, they're marginal, right? And again, you see, for example, their contribution to art and culture is marginalized. How many of the so-called mainstream parties are talking about the music, the artistry, the literary output of people who are Muslim intellectuals writing about India or Bengal, about their region, their language. So this identity question is fraught with these kind of fractures, right? It can go both ways. So you can have people who understand this and assert that let it be so. I am going to do this because the majority is asserting themselves. So why shouldn't I do so? And the trend in the larger parties, you keep quiet and you take the opportunity of the ballot to change your fate. And I don't like this word, the Muslim vote bank, because I don't think that there is a vote bank. I think there are particular political circumstances in which people vote, which means I want to give back to them the idea of reason and rationality and agency. When you say vote bank, you take away agency. You see, this is another form of communalism. That's another form of marginalization. You say you're a vote bank, which means you're an automaton, you go there and vote. Someone has told you to vote this, so therefore you have voted. Well, maybe, but what were the reasons for saying so? Were they being just driven by emotions, religiosity, or whether they were having socio-economic conditions in which to place their kind of political demands and create an agency? Parallels, for example. Colonialism divided the world into the civilized and the uncivilized. This is one of the most important lasting legacy of colonialism. And within the uncivilized, the savages, who couldn't think, who were driven by raw emotions, just went to, at your throat, cut you down, ate you even, cannibals. It was in the late 60s that Claude Lévi-Strauss, a French anthropologist of great repute, wrote a book which says the savage can think, La pensée sauvage, the savage can also think. In other words, the atonement of the anthropologists, that we're not the only people who are thinking, all right? So, analogically, when you say a vote bank, you actually take away agency from the minority. Communalism doesn't start with riots. It starts with drawing room conversations. It starts by writing out the minority. It starts by neglecting them and their contributions to the composite culture that is India. And this has been going on for a long time. So I'm not surprised that Bengal is facing this. But I still think that in Bengal it is very difficult to drive a wedge between the Muslim and the Hindu the way it has been done in North India. All right. I may be wrong, but I still hope that I am right.
But at the same time, a binary has been created, a binary that is beneficial, that is like advantageous for two particular parties, the Trinamool and the BJP. And as long as these two parties continue to dominate Bengal politics, I don't think what you hope for can be achieved. What do you say?
Well, first of all, yes, there is a binary that is being developed. And it has caught the imagination, especially among the upper classes and the middle classes. They are the ones who have been communalized the most. The solution, of course, is to have a third political entity coming in, which is where the left and the Congress would be playing a role, right? How big a role, at the moment, we do not know. But I hope that they would come in with some kind of a number in the assembly which will blunt the kind of binary that is being posed. A. B, that I think that the binary will work only when there are fractures, for example, as in North Bengal, as I was saying, right? Where you see the BJP championing Kaptapuris or
separatist
movements, which they would not in other places.
Yeah, the Gorkhaland movement.
Yes, the Gorkhaland movement. They always consistently now returned a BJP MP to Indian Parliament. But I mean, point to be noted is that the BJP will not accept a separatist movement at Uttar Pradesh or Bihar. Would they? No, of course not. Right? Not in Uttar Pradesh. Right? So different kind of courses are being laid out, and therefore different horses are being allowed to run and canter. And I think that people are not so foolish as to not see through the game. That is my hope. As which I'm saying that, I am ultimately banking upon the rationality of the people to see that the composite culture of Bengal is being sought to be fractured. All right. Despite the fact that this binary is real and that this binary will affect the coming election. Now, what has happened, of course, is that the binary is not only about Hindus and the Muslims. The binary is also about a perceived sense of corruption. A long tenure in power always gives you these kind of feelings of being corrupt. So you say, if I switch over to that party, then I may have a person who will be less corrupt. I don't think people expect a corrupt-free kind of a person in the present scenario, except for a few people from the left who are very obviously celebrated for being absolutely free of such taint. I don't think people in Bengal expect that. So much of the binary is also hiding this idea of corruption. Much of this binary is also hiding the fact that there are local overlords which have grown over, come up, evolved, unfolded over a period of the last 10 years or so, or 15 years or so. You want to build a house, you have to grease his palm. You look at Shah Jahan, for example, Sheikh Shah Jahan.
Of Sandesh Kali.
Of Sandesh Kali, right? And nothing came to light after that, you know. I mean, so suppose those people vote for the BJP. And do you think that they're voting against Hindus or against Muslims? No, it's not about religion. It's maybe the fact that they are fed up with this kind of a corrupt dispensation. Or where we look at, how the government brushed under the carpet the entire Arjikor rape incident. I mean, it's broad it's done in the broad daylight. But the fact is that people would, well, if the BJP wins, for example, in any one of the seats or a large number of seats if they win, what will they say? They say that this is a win for the Hindutva. So Hindutva itself as a campaign, while symbolically positioning itself as a homogenizing force for Hindus, also has within it layers of these kind of undercurrents.
Absolutely. Corruption and incumbency.
Yes. So the fact is that, say, for example, in the Janta experiment, which returned for the first time two of the BJP stalwarts, Lal Krishna Advani and Atal Bihari Vajpayee, in the Janta cabinet. I mean, why were they selected? Not because they were Janasangis. That time, no BJP were Janasangis. Not because of the Janasangis, because they represented someone which stood against the emergency. So let us not forget that politics, there are many more discourses and many more subtexts and stories that are not being told. They are being subsumed by these large narratives. And I'm always kind of, suspicious of large narratives. When you polarize this, you just go along with what those people who are campaigning would like us to say. But I'm sure that there are many local issues which will play out.
We've talked about larger issues and we've talked about the smaller ethnic demands.
Yes.
Now, taking everything together, how do you think all this will impact the elections? And give us a prediction.
Very difficult to predict, Surit. I mean, the last time I did Sociology was in 1998, along with Yogendra Yadav, my friend. We were the ones who did the 1998 predictions. Came out fairly correct. I haven't really done Sociology, so it'll be based on what kind of I have been reading publicly and what people like you, the journalists who do the kind of legwork, tell us. So the first time in Bengal, the ruling party will not have a 2/3 majority, and that would be the Trinamool Congress. I would wager as kind of a 10-seat win for Congress, CPIM combined, right? It can be a little less, but would not be exceeding about 10. And the rest would be with the BJP and its allies. So that's how I see it. I don't think that the momentum that the Trinamool has created will suddenly come to a halt. The other aspect, which is why I'm saying this, is of course SIR. The SIR has created actually a good wave for the Trinamool. I mean, the BJP thought it was kind of blitzkrieg, kind of, and it would steal the thunder. But what they have done is that the collateral damage has been enormous. My own wife was, under adjudication, got deleted. With a passport, and we've been traveling, and we were being raised here, etc., etc. And there are many people. I just heard that a lady who teaches in IIM Kolkata got deleted. So there are kind of many people who are not necessarily, the target of the BJP officially to be deleted, but have got deleted on this kind of very nebulous idea of logical discrepancy, which we really don't know what it is actually. But that will take a political toll. All right, and that has opened up to the public who really are not bothered about this, the nexus between the upper echelons of the bureaucracy and the BJP. And that's something the political commentators have been talking about. I mean, if you listen to any serious political commentator, they've been talking about Prashant Bhushan, Yogendra Yadav, Prabhakar Parkala, they've been all talking about this nexus of how they're going to steal votes away or skewed the voting in such a way that they would have to win it. So I think that in Bengal, the SIR has backfired.
Oh.
Right? And I think that Trinamool will take advantage of this, opening up of the SIR fiasco.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.